for a lot of people, clickbait has a bit of a negative connotation, but actually I think that's a wrong way to think about it, because I think it's a valid thing to want your data to be attractive to other people, because you want your data to be reused by other people. So the more I thought about it, the more I wanted to double down on this. And so I did add a little subtitle here, and says like, okay, 5 ways to turn your data set into clickbait. And number 4 will surprise you. So don't answer your emails. Stay tuned on this talk. Let's start a bit about what I'm going to talk. Don't worry, this is the slide with the most text on it. So what is data findability? Or rather, well, a lot of people ask me like, okay, I put my data on the internet somewhere. What more do you even want? And the truth is, the more we study the subject, the more we find that research data is actually much harder to find on the web than literature references. So a lot of people, like if you're a scientist, then you're very familiar with, searching for a paper on something. And that is actually very easy. You just type it into the search engine of your choice, and you find dozens of papers that are hopefully relevant to what you're looking for. And that is actually not the case with research data, or not as much, because data needs tend to be a bit more specific than just one word. And data sources are also much more heterogeneous. Like, there are much more data sources. There are fewer meta search engines such as Google Scholar and the like, or library catalogs. There are such activities, of course, and I participate in them, but it's not like I can tell you this one web address where you will find all the research data that is out there. That such a thing does not exactly exist. And that means that the data sources are much more distributed. There are many different repositories, there are many different catalogs, and so the shape, the infrastructure, the ecosystem of research data is actually much different than what people are used to when they're dealing, for example, with literature or libraries. And so it's actually a challenge to improve visibility. And how to do that is actually kind of straightforward. If you want to increase the findability, you have, of course, provide your metadata in common web formats, use PIDs, and implement appropriate SEO methods, and ideally also have high quality and rich metadata. This is sort of like the preview of the 5 rules, although I will go into details, because a lot of that is actually stuff that you cannot actually influence as an individual person. So I kind of concentrated on the things that you as a normal person, or normal person who wants to archive their specific data, can actually contribute. But let me talk a bit about what we are currently working on at KTS, at GESIS, and that is we're trying to figure out more succinctly how data discovery actually works. Like, what are the different steps? What happens when a person sits down and says like, okay, I want to look for data? What happens on the technological level? What happens on the social level? What happens on the psychological level? For this, we observe social science. I will talk about an observation study that we did. But we also did a survey and some interviews with our Concept SVT data centers, which are all social science data centers. And from there, we have these hands-on recommendations on how to improve visibility. So, and I promise, I think this is the last theory slide. This is the model of our discovery process. And what you can see here is that most of the people actually discover data by looking at literature, which is, of course, not how one might think about this if one does not think about it too hard. So lots of people discover data by seeing that someone else has written about a certain data set, and then they also want to use it. Another way that people find data is also by just typing it into Google or Bing or whatever their favorite web search engine is. And other people know about repositories, of course, but that, I mean, that's like 41%, so it's not that much. So it's an important number of people, of course, because this is like for us at GESIS, it's like our core customers, so to speak. But when we look at these numbers, and this is actually interdisciplinary. So if you ask biologists or physicists, and you would get very similar numbers. And this is how people are typically doing it. And 41%, and this is how they usually do it. This is not very much. So if we want to increase the visibility, we really need to get also into the other channels, which is literature, which is a web search, and which is also to a certain degree personal networks, because people also ask their colleagues, their friends for interesting data. And the path that I'm most interested in here is the left-hand path. So if you were at the last Meet the Expert Talks from Dagmar, she's mostly interested in the right-hand path, like, okay, so people already know about GESIS, so how do they find the data? I'm mostly interested in the left-hand path, which is, okay, people are coming through a different way. They already know, for example, the name of the data set. Maybe they don't know the exact spelling. Maybe they just know the acronym or whatever. But they do know it, and then they want to put that into web search, because this is what this actually means. Like most of the time when people see data in the literature, they don't actually see a link, they see a name. And so they type that in, and then they get to the result page, and then they find the data. So this is what I'm interested in, the left-hand part. Okay. And this obviously has a single point of failure, because if the data set that people are looking for does not appear on this search engine result page, then people cannot find the data, or are these seriously hindered in finding the data. So this is, I would say, the minimum requirement here. And so this is a bit of a crux. And so if you'd have like the minimum requirement, does the download link appear for your dataset when you type in the name of the acronym of your dataset into web search? So this is what everybody would expect, because this is what everybody expects how the internet works. But let's think about what actually needs to happen in order for this to be true. And the most important factor in whether or not this is true is that it depends on the repository on the website you chose for publication, for archiving. Let's talk about the deep web for a little bit. Most people are not particularly aware of it, or think that the deep web is something like mysterious, like the dark web where people sell drugs or whatever. This is actually not the case. So the dark web, the actual the forbidden part of the internet, so to speak, that is actually a very minute part. But what is really an issue is that 96% of what is really going on the internet is not indexed. You cannot find it. And a lot of people say, like, okay, that is encrypted stuff, that stuff that you have to have a password for. But again, that is only half the truth. A lot of that is actually just too boring for the indexer to pick up. So for a long time, web search engines were like, oh, okay, we have so many trillions of web pages, but even in the I don't know, 2010 years, it changed, and really very deliberately certain parts of the internet are not indexed at all. And unfortunately, this includes a lot of sites that are about research data and research content, and that is a real problem, because that means that, of course, you can still go, I don't know, for example, to Zenodo and type in the name of your data set and then find your data set like that. But if a person doesn't know that your data set is on Zenodo, for example, then it really depends on whether or not web search will show you where your data set is. So we as repository owners need to invest considerable energy to keep the content floating, because that is not like that doesn't happen automatically. So what are we doing? So when we started out, we did a little survey, and I'm not naming names because these are our allies in the fight for more visibility. But we asked people like, okay, what are you doing? So there are a couple of factors that repositories can do, and one of them is, for example, to use a sitemap to show like, okay, this is something that I want to index or not. And as it turns out, most of them didn't really do that. GESIS didn't really do that either until we started investing in that topic a little bit more. And another important factor is monitoring web traffic. You need something to know what's going on, because otherwise everything you do is sort of like you're doing it blindly, which is not a good idea. And a lot of people say like, okay, we don't want to monitor web traffic because, I don't know, for privacy reasons. But there are options to do that, which are both free of charge and only display data that is already collected. So there are no issues with privacy. So these sort of things can be used to improve these things. And this is part of what we're doing. Sitemaps are important. There's this tool called Google Search Console, which is very important to understand what kind of mistakes we're making and how to fix these mistakes. Mobile usability is actually a very important thing because that is mostly what determines the ranking. We have schema.org is an important markup, and that allows web search engines to gather structured information, which has double advantage. One is that our metadata is there in a structured way, but also just generally speaking, a website with structured data is considered to be more valuable. So we are less likely to disappear in the dark web. And this is really our main focus. And other stuff like, I don't know, using the names and headers as part of the URI and these sorts of things. And also keeping up with new trends every year, because this is a very much a moving market, which is not easy. Like this is basically a battlefield, and with a lot of commercial players as well. So does it work? So let me show you some numbers from Google Search Console on search.gesis.org. Search.gesis.org is the main subdomain of GESIS that handles search. And the first number is the number that we can influence with SEO. And an impression is basically counts how often in that given year someone has seen a web page from that particular search engine. And as you can see, numbers have steadily risen. That is the SEO part, of course. Now, does that translate into actually more users? And you can see, although the number of impressions has risen quite a lot, the number of conversions, that means the number of times that someone has actually clicked on it, has actually not risen quite as much. But that's a natural process. So the more search engine optimization you make, the more visibility you have, the more likely it is that the person who sees these things is actually not even looking for a data set. But that's just a normal site thing. And obviously, the number of clicks is also highly determined by the number of people who are actually looking for data sets. So if we have, for example, an increase in social scientists, or an increase in interest in data, which I think we can say has been happening in the last couple of years, and also like especially an increase in interest in data that is hosted at GESIS, then of course we will also see these numbers go up. So this is not a one-on-one correlation between those two. And we don't keep this as a secret. So we also tell others people on how they can increase the visibility of their repositories, especially for the other social science repositories. So what does that mean for an individual person? Like I'm talking about what GESIS can do to increase visibility, but what does it mean for an individual person? And I think that it kind of points towards this, that you should deposit your data with a good repository. This is a very good way to improve upon that. So look for repositories that are easy to find with web search. Just take a random data set and see how easy that data set is findable with web search. Make sure data set specific subpages are findable. This is what it means. And PIDs, especially DOI. So a PID is a unique identifier that is permanent, that is given out for specific data sets. That is super, super helpful in many regards. So if your repository has one of those, that's always definitely a plus. And of course, membership in national and international networks are important because whenever you are a part of these networks, then people link towards each other, and this improves the visibility. A lot of people say like, oh, I don't want to put it into a repository. I don't know, that's not what I want. It doesn't have the flexibility. But what we've seen that in many cases, people have this like double strategy where they have the data set in a repository and then a separate project website, and that is also perfectly fine. That doesn't hurt each other as far as we know. Right, so that's my first way to turn data set into Clickbait. Let me talk a bit more about research. So what we did was an observation study with 12 social scientists, and they were looking for research data in their natural habitat, which is usually an office. And then we recorded the screencast and asked them what exactly what they're doing, and then we did some structured interviews. After that, you can look at the paper if you're interested in more details. But let me just point out one of the results that we had. This is an interaction diagram for 10 of the 12 participants, TP3 to TP12. And without going into too much detail, you can see that all the gray boxes are Google interactions. Everybody in the study used Google, so there's no Bing, otherwise we would call that web search. All the blue tinted ones are literature, and all the orange tinted ones are data portals or additional information about data. And the purple ones are study project websites. So this is basically how it looks when people search for data. And you can see that there are different strategies. So some people like it's kind of common to start out with literature. For example, participant 6 started with Google Scholar, as did participant 9. Other people start with a regular web search and go from there. There are all kinds of different strategies. But the one thing that we see is that almost everyone at some point looks at literature. And this is also the truth with, this is also the case with when we ask people in a survey. So Tanja Friedrich, a former colleague, did a really big survey in which she found that 80% found research data through literature. So literature is very important. I also explained that when I talked about the model earlier. So the second way is to write papers about your data set, which is, I think, if you're a scientist like me, this is almost like, oh yeah, this is a really good idea. When you do that, make sure that the DOI that you hopefully have for your data set and the name and any name variants are always explicitly spelled out in the paper, so everyone can find the right data. That is of course important. And of course, there's an option to inspire others to write even more papers on your data. I know that especially the big study programs are very active in that and really, you know, like, for example, about funding grants for people who say, okay, I want to do a little project on secondary analysis, and they go like, okay, here you go, have fun. So this is the second way to turn your data into Clickbait that I want to present. Next, let's talk about something else which you may or may not have heard about, and this is ranking. Now, obviously, there are basically two ways to become invisible in the internet, and one of them is that you are not indexed at all, like you're just not there, and then of course you're invisible. But the other one is that you appear on page 4 as the 40-second search result. And to avoid that, it makes sense to just very quickly go into the most important mechanism of how ranking in web search works, and that is the PageRank algorithm. So how that works is basically this. The more links point towards a certain website, the more attractive that website is in this algorithm. So the more likely it is to appear very, very, very high in the ranking. It's a little bit more complicated than what I'm presenting here, but this is like one of the more important factors in that particular algorithm. So as you can see here in the left-hand picture, the most prominent domain is B, and you can see everybody points towards B. But what's also important to note is that it's very important who points to you. So there's just one domain that B points to, and that is C. And just by this one link, C also becomes quite prominent. So this is also something to keep in mind, that when it comes to links, it's not only important to have a lot of links, but it's also important to have high quality links. And there are two sources of high quality links, and one of them is academic websites. And again, this is something that we as scientists often have good access to. You probably have an institutional website or something like that, and putting your data set on this website with a link, with a description already helps a lot. And another trick is Wikipedia. Wikipedia has an excellent page rank, and to get a link from Wikipedia is actually very, very important in terms of individual visibility of data sets. It also helps to have, like teaching links and these sorts of things. So there's also something to keep in mind. So the third way is to have high-class links to your data set, your CV, institution website, teaching, and of course a blog or a Wikipedia article. Now let's come to the fourth way, which is about names and acronyms. So imagine you had a study on the German Bundestag, and you want to call it the Bundestag study. And if you have an idea of what exactly is wrong with this approach, please put it in the chat. I know that people are not able to unmute themselves, so I just wonder, like, does anybody have an idea as to why this might not be a good idea? Oh yeah, someone knows it. Yes, we have a winner. I give you maybe 30 more seconds. All right, so the problem is, if you type in BTS into the web, the following thing happens. BTS is a Korean boy band, and there is no way on earth that you will ever have a data set that is more relevant than these 7 guys. Just no way. Like, this is not going to happen, like, ever. So please don't name your data set BTS. That's just waste, right? And actually, I see that a lot. A lot of people are just falling into the trap. Yeah, but there's a relatively simple way to avoid that. And that is just to avoid common names, proper names. Like there's this other study which is called family, and another that's called age. And it sounds like it's a good idea because everybody can remember a study that's called age, but also age is a really, really common word. So when you type it into Google, it just blow up and nobody can find your data set. So the crux of this is that it's really a good idea to Google both the name and the acronym that you have in mind for any data set before you name it. Right. And this brings me to number 5, and that is the research data cycle. Now, let's take maybe another step back and think about why we want to share our data in the first place. And ideally, the idea is that while you produce data, you put it on the internet, other people can find it, and then they can use it, and then they have new ideas and they write papers about it, and then other people can build upon these ideas, right? So this is the idea of how the research data circle works, and this is also why it is so relevant to have these research data infrastructures in the first place. So that research becomes more effective, right? So it's like a supercharging thing. Like less people have to work on producing data, and more people can do research, and so research becomes more effective overall. But none of that actually works if the data cannot be reused. And this is actually a big problem. So I'm not the expert on this in particular, but from the studies that we have run, we've seen that this is actually a very big issue still, and a lot of people were finding data that they really loved, but unfortunately the documentation was not up to par, and so they couldn't actually reuse it. So that's why I'm putting that on here. So please try to document your data in a way that other people can actually reuse it. That would be the 5th way. All right, so what are we doing in the future? So one thing that is relatively new, and with that I said it's only a year old, is ChatGPT. And what we've seen already is that ChatGPT has had quite an impact on how people search for data. And so our current study is about how to study this more. Like after 1 year, we think these things are starting to get settled, and we want to figure out how that works, both on how many people are currently using it, but also if it's actually a good idea to do that. There are some pros and cons. Like we've done some preliminary results which show us that it's not a completely stupid idea to do that. But that of course changes the whole visibility debate completely. Like if everybody is using ChatGPT to find data, you would need find other ways to increase visibility. And this brings me to another point, is that I have been doing this for 4 years already, and so many things have been shifting. Structures have been shifting. There's lots of efforts right now to put everything into big meta search engines, the equivalent of Google Scholar, for example. And so it's very, very possible that in 2 or 3 years, I will give this same talk and have 5 totally different rules because so many things have changed in this particular area. So please stay tuned on that. That's my name and my email address. If you have further questions, please feel free to send me an email anytime.